tonight. So thanks to our music team for their wonderful musical leadership, and I will see you very soon. God bless you.
Good evening. No, I am not a robot. I am Pam. There we go. It's amazing. I was very honored when Pastor Paul called me and said, you know, I'm in Croatia. I said, you're where? I didn't know where Croatia was. Who knows where Croatia is? Well, you probably can Google it. There's you know, an ocean. It's Croatia. And he said, I need somebody to do the message for me. I said, oh, sure. I said, what's the topic? He said, love. I went, ooh, okay. I think I can do that. Actually, when I moved here in 1976 from Detroit, I'm sorry if you're from Detroit, I'm really sorry. I had never gone to church. Somebody asked me once if there are any churches in Michigan, and I said, I don't think so, because nobody ever invited me. And so I used to drive by this church in Laguna Hills, and we bought a home in Mission Viejo, and there was a sort of a sign out in front of the church, and they would put Bible verses out. And at the particular time I saw it, there was a Bible verse that said, I am always with you, even to the end of the age. I thought, wait, nobody's ever said that to me. See, I'm the one whose father abandoned us and I never met him. I'm the one whose stepfather was I'm sorry to say this, excommunicated Catholic, so he was mad at God. I'm the one that had a mother that was probably abused as a child and didn't know how to show love. So this is a difficult topic. So I went into that church, and they let me in, even though it was a weekday, and I said, where does it say that? Because I like what it says, it makes me feel good. And they said, it's in the Bible. I said, where? And they said, in Matthew 28. Do you have a Bible? No, I did not have a Bible. Now, they could have given me a Bible, but they made me buy my own Bible because I had to want to do it. So remember Sunshine Bookstore, anybody in Mission Viejo? I went to Sunshine Bookstore because it was near my office and said, I need a Bible. And she said, what kind? And I said, maybe in English, please. She said, oh, okay. She said, I mean, what translation? I said, English. So, all right, long story. I have an NIV. Here's the Bible. I got this in 1995. It took me that long. Then she said the magic words, do you want a red letter Bible? I said, no, I prefer that it was black because it would be easier to read. See, you know. And that started me on a journey that saved my life and changed it forever. Those little words, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. That is hugely reassuring. And I know that you've been doing a sermon series on love. The first part of the series, apparently, I talked to Pastor Paul, was on loving God, loving your neighbor, and welcoming the stranger. Now, see, I came as a stranger. And actually, this church welcomed me. They answered my questions. They didn't say, you don't belong here. I was used to hearing, you don't belong here. And I was very grateful. So you were talking about, you read The Four Loves, you studied The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis, Storge, The Love of Home, Philia, the Friendship Love from Philadelphia, Eros, and Agape. And I learned that in seminary. Yes, I went to seminary because where do you go when you want to learn about God? You have to go to school, right? That's what I thought. So I discovered by reading this little book that this is an instruction book. It's a careful instruction book on how to love. And the unconditional love that God offers us is what I call amazing grace. Because I really didn't deserve it. I was kind of like cranky and mean and swore things and did things that weren't right and drank alcohol and did all the bad things. But God didn't care. He forgave me. He brought me into the kingdom. And here I am. The most unlikely place that somebody like me would ever be, standing in front and talking to a congregation. So you talked about loving God. You talked about loving your neighbor. You talked about loving the strangers. And the scripture that was read just recently this morning was when Jesus talked to Peter. When Jesus came out, and now Jesus was resurrected. Peter was a very bad kid. I would say he's a kid. He denied Jesus. He was less likely to be saved too, but what did he say? He said, "Do you love me?" He said it 3 times. "Do you agape me?" And then he said, "Feed my sheep." So he said, take the love that I'm giving you and take it on the road and tell everybody else, because I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Did Peter do this? Of course he did. We know that. When Jesus faced the Pharisees, he was asked by one of the leaders, one of the experts in the law, in Matthew 22. One of them, an expert in the law, said, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment of the law?" Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the laws and prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Love God, love each other." That sounds really simple, doesn't it? How about love God, love each other even when you're cranky? Love God, love each other even if they don't deserve it. That's hard. Then there's this forgiveness thing. I haven't handled that yet, but I'm working on it. But one of the young men said the magic words, "Who's my neighbor?" And then the next parable was the parable of the Good Samaritan. And you're all familiar with that story, because it's a story about somebody helping somebody that would be the least likely person they would help. But they helped him anyway. He was hurt. They ministered to him. They took care of him. And this is in Luke. At the very end, they gave him money, and he said, "When I will reimburse you, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert of the law, the one who had mercy on him. Go and do likewise." He had mercy. And that's what we're called to do. And so this is the story of love. In 1 John, as you heard it read, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and truth. And that's why we're going into the next of the sermon series, and you'll hear this from Pastor Paul tomorrow. Well, actually, you won't. You'll be hearing it from me tomorrow. Pastor Paul's still taking a break. I think he has jet lag, but he'll be here. Showing love to others. And he suggested the book by Gary Chapman, The 5 Love Languages. I don't know if any of you read it. He said that he recommended it because loving somebody is one thing, but showing them how you love them is something else. And how do you show somebody that you love them? You give them money and tell them to go away? Not necessarily. What is love? Love is grace. Love is service. Love is caring. So we have the 5 acts of love. Number 1 was words of affirmation. You should have something in your bulletin on this. Positive reinforcement, verbal appreciation. So loving somebody is not enough. You've got to act like you love them, even if they're unlovable. This isn't easy, believe me. I'm sorry, I looked at my husband. I shouldn't have done that. This isn't easy. Words of affirmation, verbal appreciation, compliments, talking to somebody, being compassionate. This could be in the grocery store. This can be anywhere. This could be in school. This can be in the doctor's office when you're sitting next to somebody and they're struggling to find something out of their purse and their baby's crying. What would you do? What would Jesus do? See, that's the key. And I learned that. I had a bracelet once that said WWJD, and people would laugh. They say, what does that mean? I loved it when they asked that because I would say, what does WWJD mean? What would Jesus do? How would he handle this situation? We need to keep that in our mind and in our heart at all times. Receiving gifts, visual symbols of love. Acts of service, a request, not a demand. Now, acts of service, it doesn't mean that you are a servant necessarily. You can be a servant to love, but I can see why in reading these, how this could get miscommunicated as well. So it's important to keep your heart in Jesus mode. Receiving gifts, visual symbols of love. Have you ever given something to somebody and they're like shocked? It's like, why are you giving this to me? What did I do? It's sad when people are surprised when we're nice to them. Try standing in line at the grocery store and letting the person behind you go in front of you because they have less stuff and their baby's crying. They're like, okay, why are you doing this? Well, because I can. Sometimes you don't want to. Sometimes they're cranky. Sometimes they're nasty. Sometimes they're pushing your cart so hard you want to just smack them. But you don't. You let them go ahead of you. That is an act of service. Receiving gifts, symbols of love. Now, quality time, undivided attention. That's something we often avoid. Sometimes it's easier to watch TV or play a game on your iPad than to talk to the other person in the room. Has anybody been guilty of that? I know I had lunch once with my grandchildren and all I saw was the top of their heads because they were like this. The younger generation has a lot of advantages in their technology, but they've lost some of what's in here by the fact that they're turning to mechanical things to make decisions for them. I don't even know where to put AI. That'll probably be another sermon sometime, this AI guy. The fifth thing is physical touch. We're talking about showing people that you care. Physical touch. Now, this is a difficult one because in many relationships, there's a danger zone. And sometimes the line can be drawn at touching. Not everybody grew up in a loving family. And when you don't know how to show love, it's really hard to give love because your parents were your role models. Now, I'm not saying everybody's parents were bad. I can say mine were. They did their best, I'm sure. But they were angry all the time and abusive. And if you grew up in that kind of environment, then it's really difficult to be softer and more tender and to let the love flow. Physical touch is something that is, if you think of it just in terms of walking up to somebody and saying, "Oh my gosh, it's so nice to see you, how are you?" and touch them on the shoulder. Or shaking hands. "How do you do? It's nice to meet you." Physical touch can also be abusive, so you have to be careful. You have to know who you're approaching, because sometimes physical touch can be intimidating to people. And it's really sad that today that I even have to talk about negative things about love, but we're human. And we're here for a reason, because we all have Jesus here in our hearts. And our intentions are all to follow him and do what he says. Because in the Bible it's very clear that it is a gospel of love. From Genesis to Revelation, it's love. It's one long story. I told somebody recently that there was a book written on that. And they said, "What is it?" And I said, "Well, I have one here if you'd like to read it." And you know, when you do that, sometimes people think you're being rude. So I got the eye roll. Have you ever, I don't know if any of you have teenagers, the eye roll, like. So applying the love languages, I have a little chart that's in your bulletin. And it gives you tips on, you know, how to handle people. And honestly, Jesus did his best. Because if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, and no, that's not, there's no slide on that, I'm sorry. But the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talked about the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in heart. He talked about blessing people. He talked about loving people. He talked about guiding people. He talked about the foundation of faith. And he stood in front of thousands of people and preached only that. He preached love. He preached love to a society that was used to only abuse. The society that Jesus came into in first century Palestine was a Greek Roman society. Those were really mean people. Jesus had a hard job ahead of him, but he did it, and here we are. So I would suggest reading the book, because Pastor Paul gave that to us as an assignment. And I would like to end with a prayer so we can do our offering. Let's bow our heads. Loving Father, all of our worship, service, and faith can be summed up in one word: love. Today we ask that you pour your divine love into our hearts. Fill us up with your compassion, your patience, your kindness, so we can share it with others. Help us to love even if it is difficult. Help us to show grace to those who may not deserve it, just as you have shown immeasurable grace to us. Let love guide our decisions. Let grace season our words. Let compassion motivate our actions. In our families, our workplaces, in our communities, let us be known as people of selfless love. Help us to see others through your eyes as precious souls in need of the same love that has saved us.